Welcome, everyone. I'm Barbara Tien and delighted to welcome you to our Roots Tech project party that we're holding a series of 6 talks all during Roots Tech. And I've had the opportunity to invite some fabulous speakers to speak about the topics that are kind of beyond the genealogy and serious research topics covered during Roots Tech to more of the real family and regular folks' challenges of doing that. And that's some of what we've covered today. In this morning's talk, we had Carla von Vermetti-Stout, who spoke a little bit about her own journey in getting to that shareable family archive. And I'd encourage you to take a look at that recording on our site at projectkin.org. Tap the button and you get to the forum at your earliest convenience. And this afternoon, Pacific time, this morning, in Brisbane, Australia, is Victoria MacGregor. And I'm delighted to have her back. She was a true anchor for us in my former startup, Ponga, which some of you will know. And it's a delight to have her here. And I've asked her to talk a little bit about something that really inspired us at Ponga, which was the ways in which she took on our platform at the time from the perspective of, okay, how do I get my family engaged? So this time we're taking that conversation about the archive itself into, for lack of a better term, the human engineering, social engineering problem of bringing people in and getting them engaged. And Victoria, you want to take it from here?
I certainly can. Thanks, Barbara. Look, first of all, hi, Karen. So I've been around for a while. Barbara and we figured it out. We met about 3 years ago through the previous Ponga world, and then I was introduced to Karen and to Anna. And I've been on a bit of a hiatus over the last year, so forgive me if I ramble on a little bit. But I think what Barbara is wanting me to talk about, and it's really quite easy for me because it was a bit of my baby. A lot of it for me I was very excited about Ancestry. I had an album full of old family photographs, and not a huge family. I have about 25 cousins, but we're scattered all over the place. And I had probably email addresses for 3 or 4. So my first thing I did was I mined the addresses I had for more addresses of family. People aren't always keen to do that, to hand over email addresses. Somehow I managed to get email addresses for everyone, including some nieces and nephews. So that's the first thing. But I wanted to share with everyone through the previous Ponga platform a photograph, a particular photograph that I didn't realize was going to open up such a Pandora's box of fun stories and memories. And I know it's one of Barbara's favorites, and it was of my Uncle Bert in the early 1900s. I know, the old kind of early 1910, 1920 photographs. They're all kind of gray and yellow. And this was a professionally taken photograph of a young man, probably 20 years old, with a violin. He was playing a violin. And when I shared that photograph with my cousins, I realized it was no one ever knew that Uncle Bert played the violin. So that was the first little piece of the story. When I have to digress a little bit. When I sent this email out to everyone, inviting them to come and look at the photograph, I did pull at some emotional strings. And in this, I wrote about a family dog. My grandmother's dog. Does anybody remember Tiny the Saint Bernard? And I really, really went hard with that story that I knew they all knew about the Saint Bernard, but I needed to bring them in, and that sold them. And all of them didn't go and look at this violin picture, but 2 did. And I thought 2 out of 25 were pretty good. That was a pretty good balance. Just a little less than 10%. That was pretty good. So I said, okay. But was the interesting part about the response that I got to this photograph was they really weren't that interested in talking about Uncle Bert. playing the violin. They wanted to share stories about a $10 gift we used to get from this aunt and uncle who had no children at Christmas time. We all got $10. There was 26 of us, in 1965. That was a bit of brass in 1965. And they wanted to talk about how intimidating Uncle Bert and Auntie Pat were and how glamorous they were. Nothing about this violin at all. So this photograph that told one story opened up more stories. The other thing that it did too, to the two people that responded with great memories, one was my cousin Wendy, who is my age, and we'd had a sort of a summer relationship back in 1973 when I got shipped off to camp with them for the summer. And I didn't like Wendy very much in 1973 because we liked the same boy at the campground. So now that story came out because of this picture of the violin, this memory, this story. And then the other cousin was my cousin Frank, who I had never met. I wouldn't know him if I fell over him on the street. But he had a great story about the $10 to the on the tree. And not so much with Frank, but with Wendy, we are now in regular contact. I say regular email contact. She lives north of Toronto. And we've fallen into this catch-up thing that we do every once in a while. What's going on? We recently moved, then she recently moved. So we're sharing current life stories, all because of a simple photograph of an old guy with a violin. So what I say to and I'm in a bit of a transition phase. I'm a post-Ponga person. So I'm in this transition phase of looking at how am I going to reproduce that opportunity to bring people into more photographs. And I'm trying different things and looking at different things, and I've got more stories to tell. I find that with some family members, and you probably are all the same, some are really keen and some don't care at all. They really don't. And that it might be because they're time poor and, they're just not there. We get to a certain age and these things become really interesting to us. As I said to Barbara the other day, I'm really hoping that when somebody looks at a picture of me holding a cat or standing next to a car or something, they find that photo interesting and they want to know where I was and what I was doing in 100 years from now. And we all do. We have photographs that are 100 and 150 years old. And I want to know, why is that person standing in that window and why was it a gray day? And it's all out of that. And so I hope that I do that. It's just to find that place. And there is a sweet spot that gets people engaged. And I used an email invitation filled with a story to get them to come in.
I remember that story being impressing me so much, especially at the time that you first told me about using, it was paperless post,
yes,
to dazzle your recipients and make pay attention.
Yep.
Because frankly, at Ponga, we put a lot of effort into creating beautiful emails. Separate issue on deliverability and all those kinds of things, because frankly, from a technology perspective, that's hard. Greetings all around. It was an informative experience at Ponga. And I feel like I have grown, matured, and learned a lot from that experience. From the talk, as you will have a chance to listen to later, and those of you watching from home in bunny slippers will appreciate pulling all of these talks together. Carla's talk walked through her journey of getting there and that challenge of engaging family. As you're talking about this, I'm really struck again, maybe it's my maturity hitting me, but loneliness is a thing with the elderly. I don't know who I'm talking about being elderly here, But as we reach a certain age and our kids are grown and have their own busy lives, our loved one, our elders, our even aunts and uncles have passed or are elderly or can't get engaged in the technology, reaching our classmates and our extended family who are cousins, suddenly there is a friendship and a kinship and a shared experience that we'd never realized
Mm.
before. And I think what you're touching on, what both of you have touched on, is really ways to start getting at that. Your story, and I think coming back to artifacts and things, I mean, hits the heartstrings, of course, in your story. But there were things that you learned and ways to ask about that and keep going. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Look, I think that with moving forward with getting people engaged, it went beyond just the violin picture. What that allowed me to do was to open it up more. I got a little bit more creative and inventive with my storytelling, and I was very fortunate to have some old 8mm video with photographs. So I mean, I learned an awful lot in my time when I first met Barbara. I learned how to do all kinds of things. And I found a way to incorporate a little bit of video with a photograph. Maybe it's transferable. Maybe it's contagious. When I would get really excited about a photograph or a video and put something together that I thought was Oscar stuff. I thought this was like, I was going to be standing on stage with a gold statue. It seemed to get more of a response. The more excited I got about it, the more response. So I had an old video of my grandfather, who I never met, with this dog that I had met. And he there's no sound. It's from the late 50s. But I can see him moving and talking to my brother, who was a little boy at the time. And it was really, it was voyeuristic, but it was very emotional. I was looking at something, I wasn't there, but these were people who were my blood relatives. So I got very excited. I shared that, and that got a huge response. And not only that, I got more videos back of the dog.
So Tiny was the Saint Bernard.
Tiny's the dog. Tiny the Saint
Bernard. These things, when you like slip right past the rational brain to the heart, you latch into memory, and it's the crack of dawn for you, or relative. It's still coffee time for you now. You will not have had a chance to see the opening act at Roots Tech. I think it was 10 a.m. Talk this morning. They show a video for family. This part of the Family Search introduction, and the film they show is a three-hanky champion, and it's speaking to the idea of memory and how important memory is. They even show a video to an older person about their loved ones and their memories, and they're using a projector, or at least the device of a projector, so you hear that rat 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 sound. It like hits all the notes. It's marvelous. I'm going to drop you, I'll drop into the chat, and obviously I'm throwing a few in here. I'll drop into a chat the link that I put in a Projectkin way to get in there quick and easy, so you can listen to it.
Now do that. But I think that's part of it. And for me, I think that's the biggest part of it, is if you are moved by something, and we're not all, writers, and, we don't have that gift of the Hallmark thing, but I think that if you're excited about it and you're emotional about it, you'll be able to spark that in somebody else. It will come out, and they will come back. And if they're excited about it, and they see something, and they're going to mention it to somebody over the dinner table, or it's going to get forwarded in an email. Something is going to happen, and that story is going to get bigger, and you're going to learn stuff that you didn't particularly, you were ever going to get the chance to know. Because these cousins of mine, I was never ever going to sit down across a table from them, not in a fit. So I think that for me, it is always a challenge. It's always a challenge to get people to engage with you. or it is for me anyway. I have a sister, and there's a conversation for another time, but I have a sister who will just not share any of her information. She just won't do it. And she doesn't seem to want to know when I share stuff with her. It feels competitive, but it's not. It's no reason for it to be competitive. If I find something out, if I find a little nugget in the ground, I want to share it. And some people don't. So that would probably be the biggest thing, is just to let it out. I mean, just let it go.
I unfortunately, I'm sort of recovering from a family where there were important subjects that were private. There were important subjects that were secrets. And in my advanced age, I look at these things now that I am healing from those secrets. And part of my own effort is to respect them as private for when they need to be. It's someone else's story to tell. It's not my story to tell. But some of these were mine, but that's a separate issue. But finding the time to open them up, and sometimes that's about creating the environment to have those conversations. And I think that's where privacy becomes so important. My Ponga phrase I used a lot, because Ponga had a lot of privacy, was the conversation that you have in the living room is not the same as the one at the mic in the town square or recorded on Zoom, because there are deep subjects. I mean, I haven't talked about these family issues either, because it doesn't really matter to anybody else. What does matter to everybody else is finding that they too can find the permission, the space, the context to have those conversations. Often privacy creates the space, and then the tone and expectations and everything else to get there. And sometimes email is just a piece of it. People have to feel invited. They have to know what's going to happen with what they share, and all of those other kinds of aspects.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I have those, the transcripts of the comments on the violin picture. And I mean, it's just me. I would never repost those comments to another platform. I'd never copy and paste them and post them into another platform without saying to these people, look, this doesn't exist anymore, but I'd like to share your comments, make them available to everybody else who was originally there, and this is what I'm going to do with them. Because they're not my words, they're their words. And so I would never do that. And privacy is important, absolutely important. We are talking about people that aren't around anymore and haven't been around for 50 years. But it's still important. As you say, some of those stories, were private and need to remain private. I had an experience with that as I went to England in September, and I was fortunate for some of you may have remembered, I did this whole thing about a pub in the UK called the Black Dog. And I learned through my research that Black Dog pub, for all intents and purposes, was my family ancestral home through the 1800s. We were all publicans. And I was so oblivious, and you're going to think, at least I'm admitting it, I was oblivious to what the word publican even was, because I was doing ancestry and I was going through all these censuses. And I said to my partner, I said, Michael, what's a publican? And of course, he was born in the UK. His head just about exploded. And he said, well, it's a person who runs a pub. Oh, okay, this is all making sense. Anyway, so off I go to England, and on top of my list is go to the Black Dog pub. And I want to, touch the walls and everything and sit in a chair, hopefully see old Benjamin Helm, who owned it, but he didn't present himself. Anyway, I meet with two local historians, fabulous guys. And really, they arrived with a grocery bag full of the local archives. These are from the 1800s documents they pulled out of the church, opened them up in the pub. And what I learned in about 3 hours' time, the biggest takeaway for me was I had a grandfather, and none of my family knew this. I don't even know if my mother knew it, but he drank himself to death. In the early 1870s, he was a publican. He literally drank himself to death, and they found him dead on the pub floor. Big story. Big story. But for me, that's not the whole story. The whole story is, why did he drink himself? to death? That's what I want to know. And all you just start scratching away. And so this would have been my great-grandfather, my great-great-great-grandfather. It explained a lot of stuff to me from all the research I was looking at, the sad things you'd see in all the information. And I felt it was a huge, it wasn't a, you know, based on tragedies. It was a tragedy at the time for the family. But I was so quick. I wanted to share this so fast, but I haven't yet. I haven't shared it yet because I'm not 100% sure how to tell it. And once I've got that figured out, it might be an article. Once I've got that figured out, then I will share it with my cousins, because I can't figure out how to share it. Whereas, what's the angle? Is the drinking to self to death, or where it happened, or what was before it? I can speculate why I think why it happened. But once I've got that figured out, then I will share it. But until then, it stays private.
By the way, to slip in a little plug here, our what we call our project recipe events, one of the kinds of events that we do here for Projectkin, is having someone who has completed a project talk about how they completed that project. And I broke my rule on that to invite an old classmate of mine who has finished and been very successful with her first memoir and is working on her second. So she's in the process of figuring out how to tell the story. She's an experienced journalist, actually a professor of journalism at Columbia School of Journalism, no less. So she knows how to tell stories, but it's a process. And so we get to talk to her in the middle of that crafting. You know, is this about the place? Is it about the chronology? Is it about the people? Is it about her, you know, what is the thread that pulls it all together? And I think for all of us who are in this family history space, speaking for myself with no ambitions of being a published writer, but with many ambitions of capturing and sharing stories. For me, they take many forms because I'm a nerd, but finding ways to understand that craft from, you know, writing has had such a long history of a craft, and there's so much to learn. We're like playing with new instruments, and I'm just so excited about this and this process of that kind of a difficult story. I suppose I have a difficult story like that as well with my mom, and and really understanding why she did what she did and how that factored in her whole life. And I don't know that I'm at a point yet to know enough about it to even try to tell that story. But aren't we all itched by curiosity?
I think so. I think it is. It is. We are curious. Unfortunately, we are curious, and maybe it's human nature. I know, because I travel a lot, I know the best stories that you can tell about your traveling is when things go terribly wrong. Nobody's really interested in the pretty flowers in a field somewhere. They all want to know when you got a flat tire on the side of the motorway. That's what they're really interested in. So I think it's the same with family history. We're looking for that intriguing little story, the little tidbit that nobody knows, and we want to share that. Nobody wants to know about the pretty summer wedding and everything was perfect. No. They want to know about a house burning down or something terrible has happened, and why did it happen? And so we're curious. We're curious about that. That makes a much more interesting when there's a villain, it's a much more interesting story.
You know, it's funny you say that, because in the context of the earlier remark about journalism, I suddenly was thinking about the classic man bites dog, a newspaper story about a dog biting a man. Well, I mean, a man walking a dog is not interesting. No. A man bites dog is interesting.
Very interesting.
And
very
that, you know, yes. I think for Projectkin, that's what I mean by a hook.
Yes.
But that hook pulls you. And it's the itchiness, it's that curiosity. Genealogy, in my view, is like engineering. Genealogy are the facts that keep your bridge to somewhere else steady and solid. But the thing that makes you want to cross the bridge is the hook.
Yeah. And it is finding that hook. And that's why with this black dog, with the photograph of my Uncle Bert, the hook was the violin. That was the hook. Had nothing to do with the ultimate story. And probably with the UK and the pub, the hook is the black dog. That pub is really the center of many stories. He didn't die in the black dog. He died at a pub down the street. But that's the hook, is to bring them in, or the hook is me going there. I don't know, but there will be something that I will be able to bring them in, and I just have to really think on that one. I just don't know. There's other stories too that are really interesting, but that one is for me because he was sort of the forgotten great grandfather. I never really put much attention to him. It was always the other side of the family that was the interesting fellow. He did all the good. He was, but this guy, not so much. So yeah, that's what I plan on doing. But and I don't know if everybody else comes across the same problems that you're trying to engage family. It's very different from having a business on the internet and you're trying to reach as many people as possible and you're going to grab them no matter what, and you're putting feelers out all over the place, wires are going everywhere, and you'll scoop whoever comes. This is specific. You want your family to come in. You really want them to be engaged. So it's a very small field that you're picking from, and it's hard. It is really hard.
That's a brilliant insight, because we talk about this a lot as Projectkin being platform independent. And frankly, with my own experience, I'm trying to succeed with a platform. All the platform-based tools are designed to help you, and I'm thinking of things like Facebook, are designed to do that, bring them all in, because we're selling advertising. But when you're thinking about your own family, the numbers aren't the goal. You know who is out there. It's the quality of actual engagement and how you do that and how you drive that. We can go ahead and open it up to questions, but and we'll be wrapping the recording shortly. But just to tip again to Carla's talk earlier today, with a different kind of platform in terms of a model, but also one founded by a Projectkin member, Simon Davies, but looking at it a little bit differently in terms of what you're trying to accomplish, and funded and supported differently in terms of what you're trying to accomplish and how you get that, what you talk about publicly, what you keep private, and how you go through that. Are there others who would like to join in on questions? Just hit that big red mute button. And if you have trouble, I'm not sure if I can help. I don't think I can unmute. I think I learned I can mute. Go ahead.
I don't know what mute button is.
Oh, there's a microphone button, and when it's on.
Oh yeah, I'm good. I'm talking.
You're talking. Good. I'm talking. Go ahead, Carla.
The idea of a hook is really good, and especially with my blog posts, I know the ones that I get the most response to are when I'm telling them something that's just a little out of the norm or it's unusual to the family. And I have a story, and I've never shared it yet, and I'm trying to really figure out how, because it's got some exciting pieces, but it's got some really dark pieces as well. And it's about a first cousin of my grandmother's, and I honestly don't think anybody in the family had a clue. I mean, among other things, he was a gangster during the 1930s and 40s. But there's more to that story. And it's like, but yet there are some really, really sad parts to that story. And I haven't found a good way to share it yet.
That is so hard. That's the hook is you just can't, you've got all this stuff, this stories, and you see it all. But which thread do you pull?
Not to oversimplify it here, but the juxtaposition of these thoughts just made it sort of clear. In a sense, if we think like a journalist, where the bad news sells and the drama sells, and yet as family historians, well, as we talk about our legacy, we talk about telling the perfect story about why everything came out just happy. And as I read in my grandmother's book, everyone lived happy, productive lives. That's just not that interesting. So why do we want them to be engaged, to just dig up the dirt? It's like those 5th grade kids learning about the Dark Ages and torture. You know, they love that stuff. It's it's in contextualizing, it's in telling a larger story. And you know, Karen, I don't know if you can see me, but I'm looking at you because I'm thinking about an experience. You can hit that mute button. There you go. You know where it's coming. Okay, Anna, you too.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Hit me with it.
You guys are experienced storytellers and have been there in terms of that balance of a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
How do you solve that?
I think that when you talk about why you lift up these stories that are like, I recognize what Victoria is talking about with this publican who drank himself to death. It's like My Soldier that I wrote about. It's someone who hasn't been talked about at all in the family. It has been, you know, you try to take them away from the story, from the storyline and from the family, because they had an accidental life or a bad life or a bad ending. And it's a way for us, because we are a bit further away from them, and we want to lift up the truth. We want to add them back in the family and not be forgotten. However, you know, 100, 150 years ago, that wasn't the case. They wanted to have this fantastic life where everything was good and brilliant and living up to this fairy tale story. Yeah. Today, we know that life isn't a fairy tale.
No.
Yeah.
And we want to show both sides of it.
Yeah.
Because they are needed to understand the whole thing. So I had a discussion earlier today on an editorial meeting for a genealogy association membership paper, and the theme for the next issue is going to be about different kinds of occupations in the local area, and that would be mining and making charcoal and, you know, floating timber down the rivers, and lots of accident-prone jobs. And you're going to have to write about the bad bits, but you will also have to write about the good bits. So yes, you might die in the mine, and it's filthy and it's dark and it's wet. But imagine celebrating Christmas 200 meters down inside the earth in the mountain, having a Christmas tree, having lots of miners playing instruments and singing songs that they have written themselves, and handing out, you know, papers, drinking their moonlightning stuff, brews and the coffee, of course, preferably mixed. So it's like those two sides to everything. It's the yin and yang.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think that is important for us, and that's why we try to lift up all the bits that have been left out.
Yeah.
I agree with you, Anna. It's almost, to use the vernacular so popular in the media right now, we don't want to create a cancel culture in our family histories. And so finding ways to share those stories. It's easier when a family member is long dead, although as you're hinting, Vicki, you know, there's can be some resistance too when folks have a different view of what's proper to share and what's not. However, those sometimes, to be polite, rough around the edges family members, I have them in my way back family as well. I think there's a pirate in there somewhere, but that's another story. Ooh. And that is that persistence and determination and courage, even if it might play out on the wrong side of the law occasionally, or in ways that would not be for the etiquette pages. They're part of what makes your story, and as well as all the beautiful ordinary stuff that we'll talk about too. But bringing that in is important. It's just how to do it in a way that you sleep well at night and you can have this book out on your coffee table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think too, it makes them real.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it makes them real because we're all flawed. We all do things we're not supposed to do at some point in our lives. And I think it just makes them real. You think, and helps everyone understand that just because something really was distasteful, or when it would be distasteful today, it still needs to be mentioned. It was part of their lives. It was important.
I was
Think
just
about how rough.
I saw a
Go ahead.
document. I was looking for something else earlier today, because why not look for documents while you're at Roots Tech and bunny slippers at Roots Tech? But it was a Storyworth. Someone, and I might even have been Karen that sent it to me. Somewhere I got a list of Storyworth questions to ask a client. I can't find it right now. But going back to a lot of strangely enough, which I was thrilled about. I'm not sure this was particularly the method I would have chosen, but my son purchased my husband and I Storyworth memberships for Christmas. So it's nice to have a kid who wants to hear those stories. But so far, all the questions are, what was the best? What was the favorite? What was this? There's not any questions about, well, what was it like to be, or like whatever kind of thing. What was it like to have your mother have cancer when you were 4 years old? There's nothing to bring out those kind of stories. And yet, and I put that quote, my favorite quote is, "We are who we are." I think it's from Downton Abbey, actually. I think it's the source. I could go look, actually have it on a wall plaque, because of they were who they were. But understanding why they were who they were gives a lot of insight into why we're who we are. And I think that's those tough stories. And my family, we have quite a few of those tougher stories in my family. And I asked an aunt once, because my mother and my father weren't married when I was conceived, and so I had one aunt that I would have known him. She was my mom's best friend at the time, and I said to her, "So can you tell me about my father?" And she goes, "Well, what do you mean?" She goes, "Your father's so and so," and that's my father who adopted me when I was 7, my mother's first husband. And she said, "Oh, he's your father." And that was the end of it. And it's like, well, what about the other guy? Like the guy who was my actual father. So that was just like, that generation was like, "No, we're not even going to talk about that." Like, your father is this guy. So it's interesting though, because fortunately I've now met my whole side of the family from my dad's side of the family, my real father, and they're more than happy to share stories, and there's wonderful stories. And so it's but it is that talking about that, and even how important that is Anna, you talking about the coal miners and what the positive of what they experienced. My grandfather was a coal miner in England before he left and came to Canada in 1929 to farm. And we always thought, well, what possessed him to drag my grandmother and his 2 little kids to Canada, to the middle of nowhere, because at that point, that was pretty much, most of Canada was really nowhere. There was just a bunch and farm in this little scrap. And so we've always looked at all the deaths at the collieries and thought, well, that probably didn't want to continue in that life. But what your point about, there was the fun part about it. They did have joy. They had parties and celebrations in the coal mines too. Wasn't all as awful as it was for an occupation. It wasn't all bad. And I think that's the dichotomy, or having the 2 sides to everything, is so important. Like,
right. Well, that roller coaster of life is reflected in the roller coaster of our stories. I kind of hate to, Betty Ann, I'm thrilled to have you joining in the conversation. We're about 40 minutes in now. So I'm going to take a moment and give the outside world watching this as a recording and a taste of how the conversation continues afterwards in our after party, and end the recording, and Betty Ann invite you to come along. Or did you want to be sure this is recorded?
It doesn't matter. I'm thinking while we're talking stories, we also need to talk snippets.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording right there, and